NATO leaders are just minutes away from convening a virtual summit to discuss the future course of action against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The member states are arming up the borders of European countries on the Eastern Front. With a vow to defend every inch of NATO territory, the US has announced the deployment of an additional 7,000 troops to Germany. These forces will be positioned in a defensive capacity to defend and reassure NATO allies in the face of an invasion of Ukraine. Biden has once again repeated that US forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia inside Ukraine. 2 American F-35 fighter jets have landed at the Borsia air base in Romania as part of NATO's further bolstering of its eastern flank. Trucks carrying US military vehicles have arrived at a military base near Constanta, a city at the Black Sea. Germany has deployed 3 more Eurofighter jets to Romania to support NATO's air policing mission. A handout video shows the jets from the 74th Tactical Air Force Wing taking off from the airbase in Newburgh. Berlin has deployed almost 1,000 troops in Lithuania as part of the German-led NATO combat unit and is taking part in NATO's air policing in Romania. Drone footage shows British troops arriving in Estonia. The British Army can be seen transporting tanks and military equipment into Estonia as part of NATO's mission. NATO has ordered its military commanders to intensify their preparations to defend Allied territories, putting hundreds of warplanes and ships on alert and agreeing to increase troop numbers on its eastern flank. Italy, meanwhile, has announced the supply of an additional 3,400 military personnel to support NATO's efforts. And France is yet to decide their part of armed contribution to the alliance.
La nostra priorità oggi deve essere rafforzare la sicurezza del nostro continente e applicare la massima pressione sulla Russia perché ritiri le truppe e ritorni al tavolo dei negoziati.
Nous avons livré des équipements militaires et nous sommes toujours en train d'étudier les demandes qui viennent de nous être faites et nous allons statuer très rapidement.
Well, to get more on this very fast-moving story, our correspondent Susan Turani is joining us live from New York City. Susan, this NATO meeting just minutes away from getting started. President Biden, of course, is taking part. What do you think his message will be to the leaders and their leaders' meeting message in general to the Russian people?
1 minute. President Biden really needs to convince NATO. NATO leaders and President Biden have been on the same page for the most part in dealing with Russia. And I think they've managed to put and set forth a united stance against Russia, at least in demonstrating to the world that NATO does have relevance. I think where the cracks are right now is moving forward and finding a united stance in imposing further sanctions against Russia. The sanctions that were imposed against Russia, excuse me, I'm sorry. 1 minute. The sanctions that were imposed against Russia by the United States yesterday, I think, we'll have to, as President Biden said, we'll have to wait and see how it will affect Vladimir Putin. What NATO and the United States will be discussing is how to move further to assist Ukraine beyond the sanctions that the United States announced multilaterally, and then help Ukraine in other fields, that is defense capabilities as well. But it's a tricky situation because once the United States and NATO help Ukraine to a certain extent. When Russia is advancing in Ukraine, then the United States and NATO become a party to that war as well. So I think this meeting is very important in trying to find a fine line in assisting Ukraine on the one hand, but not becoming a party to the war between Ukraine and Russia on the other. And of course, reinforcing NATO's eastern flank is extremely important right now at this point, because many are convinced that Vladimir Putin has further aspirations besides Ukraine.
And Susan, the other big meeting of the day, this one taking place in New York City, where you are a little bit later on this afternoon, is of course the UN Security Council meeting. We're expecting them to vote on a resolution condemning Russia's actions. What can we expect from that meeting?
Yes, so the United Nations Security Council will be meeting, and this was a meeting that was held it's a follow-up to the meeting that was held just a few days ago, condemning Russia for its advancement into Ukraine. And as the meeting was taking place, Russia went ahead and further invaded Ukraine. They wanted to put forth a resolution condemning Russia's incursion into Ukraine. However, the draft was set. The issue that we have with putting that draft resolution into vote, which they hope to do today, is that Russia is a veto-wielding power of the United Nations Security Council. So while member states are united in calling out Russia for its invasion into Ukraine, this vote on the draft resolution and a possible resolution is doomed to fail because of Russia's veto-wielding power, and some countries in the Security Council will probably abstain from voting. Ultimately, what could happen is this resolution could go straight to the General Assembly, and there could be a general condemnation, perhaps, from member states. But that is what's happening today, later on in the afternoon, at the Security Council. But the United States and its allies, at least, hope the West in general to again present a united front in condemning Russia's action. Practically, what they can do, not so much.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City.